Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us for our webinar over the lunch hour today. This one is best practices in SharePoint migration for those of you going from one on-prem instance to another. On Thursday, we'll have the second part of this, also by Novigo Solutions. The link for that registration is in the chat. And at this time, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter, Mohamed Ubaid.
Hi, I'm excited to present this webinar. As Nate mentioned, my name is Mohamed Ubaid. I'm working as a senior consultant with Novigo Solutions. And before I continue, please introduce Novigo Solutions. Novigo is a Microsoft Gold partner, a CMMI Level 3 certified provider of end-to-end IT solutions, and was founded in 2012. We are headquartered in Dallas, in the UAE, with offshore delivery centers in India. At Novigo Solutions, we are a leading provider of SharePoint and Office 365 based solutions. Our team has collectively completed 50 plus intranets and extranets and public facing websites over the last 7 years. We have also migrated some of the largest intranets in the Middle East region. So today's webinar will be all about SharePoint migration, specifically targeting AD migrations. You will get an introduction on how you can migrate your SharePoint on-premises farm from one domain to another. Often this scenario comes up during mergers, demergers, acquisitions, and it is very important to make sure your users can access SharePoint during and after the migration. We also have a part 2 of this webinar targeting SharePoint Online, and that will be conducted by my colleague, Mr. Agdas Asif, on 10th of January, same time. So to do that, let's have a look at today's agenda. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. Migration prerequisites and planning. What you need before you can start your SharePoint and your domain migration. These are the activities you need to take care of before you start with your migration. These include preparing your source environment, preparing your destination environment, ensure your users are well aware of the migration that is going to happen. Best practices to set up your new SharePoint farm. This webinar is targeting SharePoint 2016. However, the installation, configuration, and the procedure for SharePoint 2019 is pretty much the same. Do's and don'ts. The user migration, so how you can migrate your users to a different domain. So remember, this needs to be executed after your SharePoint installation is completed and the backups are migrated to servers residing in your new domain. Summary of today's webinar, and we'll have the questions later. So this is a quick overview of the presentation today. So on the left side, you can see we have the source environment that's with SharePoint 2016 on premises, and it's connected to your Active Directory. And on the right side, we have our destination environment, and it's connected to a different domain. So basically, the gist of this entire migration for your domain migration is going to be you have to set up a new SharePoint farm in your target domain and reconfigure all your service applications, migrate all your data or restore the data if you're taking the database backups, and the last is going to be migrate all the users. So fundamentally, you must create a new farm in the target domain and move the existing content. At a high level, this involves the following steps. So back up all your content databases and configurations. This is the next step and must not be taken lightly. Back up every single detail of your SharePoint farm, including configuration settings, databases, farm configuration, custom solutions, web.config modifications, etc. Then you need to create your servers in the new domain. So there are two options available here. So either you can set up fresh virtual machines on your target domain, or if you have enough resources available, or if you are using the min-role architecture, or if you have a UAT or a DR environment set up, You can actually disconnect your existing servers from the config database and change the domain on those servers, and then join them to the new domain and join to the new configuration database. So the next thing that you'll have to do is, once you have joined all the new servers to the new farm with the new config database, is create all your new service applications. You can use existing databases for the service applications wherever applicable. You need to create your new web applications, because you need to remember this is a complete different SharePoint configuration database, and this does not have all the customizations as well as the web applications that you've created in your source environment. You need to deploy all your custom solutions and custom configurations, let it be your WSP packages, your timer jobs, or including your user profile, custom properties if you have to, or any web.config changes, any file system level changes that you may have done, like blob cache, etc. You need to mount the databases to the respective web applications, and you need to migrate the users from the old domain to the new domain. So this is a high level overview of the entire migration approach. So the next is going to be, I'm going to talk about the migration prerequisites and planning. So something that is more important during the migration and the entire project is going to be the migration team. I have listed down the key people that are to be involved in this project. So migration lead, the project manager, architects, site owners, etc. So based on the size of your SharePoint farm, based on the number of users that you have in SharePoint, the migration team could vary. Assessment of your source environment. So this section takes a look at your SharePoint configurations, your custom solution, your workflows, the number of users, permissions, etc. Target environment readiness. This is, you need to set up two-way trust between your domains or forests depending on your environment. Setting up your SharePoint environment in the new domain and keeping in mind the best practices to be followed while setting up the SharePoint servers. And the migration POC to ensure your success criteria is met. So even before you actually do a migration on your live system or your production system, it's always recommended that you try out the complete approach on your development or your UAT environment to ensure the steps that you're following are correct and your success criteria can be achieved. So the migration team, the ideal roles and responsibilities here would be, for the migration lead would be to manage the entire migration team, plan the tasks, and schedule the meetings. So migration should be handled very similar to a regular project in your organization, which means it's likely to have a migration team. In an ideal world, this migration team would look like as you currently can see here on the screen. So every migration team needs to have a migration lead or a team lead, and the migration lead is responsible for managing the migration team, planning the tasks, scheduling meetings, and leading the team. Because this migration is not just a SharePoint migration, it is also migration of your users in the domain. You will also be involving a different teams within your IT infrastructure. That would be network, that would be your AD team, etc., Exchange Server team, etc., not just your SharePoint team. So that's why we would also need a good project manager. I think a dedicated project manager is also a crucial member of this migration team, and the project manager here is responsible for managing the project plan and all the related activities. As we are migrating to a new target environment, it makes sense to have an information architect join this team as well. The information architect is responsible for creating the information architecture in the target environment and capture the current information architecture in the source environment. Once the migration is done, all these sites are handled by the site owners, and it can make sense to have the site owners join the migration team as well, so that they know that this is okay, what happened during the migration, and how permissions or users are migrated, and issues, if any, can be mitigated the right way. So simply moving a SharePoint farm from one domain to another is not possible, since SharePoint hardcodes server names, account names, including domains in the configuration database. This is done in multiple tables. There is no way to modify these settings in a supported manner. You can always go back and make modifications to the SQL Server database, but that's not supported by Microsoft. While you might be able to get away with this for a single server development environment, there are many blogs out there detailing how to do this for a single server environment. But attempting to do this with a production or a multi-server farm is a very bad idea and is in fact unsupported. So you need to assess the source environment very carefully. So in terms of the SharePoint configurations, it could include the number of servers in the farm, your server's applications and their configuration, the managed accounts created in your source environment, user policies set up at the web application level, the web application settings. It could be related to claims authentication, it could be related to the permissions, etc. Your email configurations, all your content databases, because you need to take a backup of them and restore them in your target environment. Service application databases, your custom user profile properties. Many of our customers have actually created a lot of custom user profile properties, and they're storing different values in them. Either they are synced from the AD or they're getting information from a different database. So all these information is available in the source environment, which needs to be replicated in the target environment as well. So you would also have managed paths created on the web applications at the source environment. Your custom solutions could include the deployed solutions, your activated features, any third-party products. There could be an in-text workflows or K2 workflows. You could have a lot of custom products deployed on your on-premises farm. The workflow assessment would include the running workflows, the tasks assigned to the people, because there is a possibility after the database is migrated to the target environment, the workflow would actually not proceed, and you may have to restart the workflow. So most of the times it is always recommended that you complete all the workflows before you start the migration, but in practical scenarios, it actually doesn't work out that way. Users will never be able to approve or close all the running workflows. So when we migrate to the target environment, we may actually have to restart all the workflows available in SharePoint. So this is very important for us to know in which site, in which list or library there are running workflows, and how can we restart them with minimal effort. The user assessment includes site collection administrators and permissions to AD groups. Once we run the user migration, the users are going to migrate it in the AD as well as in SharePoint, and users may not be able to log in with their old AD account, or even if they're able to log in with the old AD account, they might not be able to perform the same task that they used to perform earlier, since they're now migrated to a new account and need to log in with a new account in the system. So it's very important to know if all the users are migrated, at least the site collection administrators are migrated, and all the AD groups are migrated in SharePoint. So when it comes to customizations in SharePoint, so you always have to make a list of all the customizations. So it could be UI designs, it could be web parts, workflows, line of business applications, third-party tools, custom features. It could be site definitions, field types, custom SharePoint solutions, any changes to the file system on your SharePoint servers. So most of these customizations, if you have an inventory, we can migrate them to the target environment with minimal effort, because we are taking a complete database backup of our source and restoring it to the destination SharePoint 2016 farm. So the impact is going to be minimal. But if you are migrating, let's say SharePoint 2013 to a SharePoint 2016 farm on the target Active Directory, this makes a lot of sense to have a complete inventory of all the customizations in your system. So the target environment readiness, mostly deals with having a clean, two-way trust set up between both the domains. So a two-way trust can be thought of as a combination of two opposite-facing one-way trust, so that the trusting and the trusted domains both means that authentication requests can be passed to two domains in both directions. So all domain trusts in an access are two-way transitive trusts. So depending on your environment and infrastructure, you may also need to configure DNS to enable trust between two Active Directory forests. So one of our customers in the Middle East region was a bank, and we recently had a merger. The target environment was SharePoint 2016, and it was available in the new bank domain, whereas the SharePoint 2013 environment of Bank 1 and the SharePoint 2016 environment of Bank 2 were both merged together and made available as a single SharePoint intranet on the third domain. So in this scenario, there was a two-way trust set up between all the three domains, and users from all three domains were able to log into SharePoint with their own AD credentials. And after the migration, all users were after the AD migration, all users were migrated to a single Active Directory, and the old banks were discarded. So it makes very important case here to have a two-way trust set up between all the domains. So you also might have to configure the DNS to make the trust between two Active Directory forests work. So you also have to create new service accounts in the new domain. So if you already have a SharePoint environment running in your domain, you may already have the service accounts available. But in case you're a fresh domain, you may not have the service accounts available. So it's always a good time to go back and check if you can create the necessary service accounts required for SharePoint. So in SharePoint environment, you may have to set up your new servers. You have to join all servers to the new farm. You need to restore backups from your source environment and reconfigure all the service applications. Once your destination environment is ready, you start migrating the users in the AD, and then you start migrating users in SharePoint using the STS ADM commands. It's controversial to say you need to use the STS ADM commands here, but we have seen in the past that the PowerShell commands do help in migrating the user, but usually fails at times when the user has never logged into your SharePoint site. So STS ADM makes sure that everything is migrated, all users are migrated 100%. And the ADMT tool from Microsoft, which helps users to migrate SharePoint users between domains as well, uses the STS ADM commands itself. So depending on your organization size and infrastructure resources available, you will have to plan to migrate all your users from your old domain to the new one. So this can be achieved using tools like ADMT that allow you to migrate your users between domains and preserve the SID during the migration. Your user migration planned extremely well in advance, and is going to be a whole project in itself. So it's not just about the SharePoint migration, it's also about the AD migration. So all computers connected to your AD, your file shares, your permissions, etc., are going to be migrated with the user migration. So SharePoint is just a piece of software that needs to work and authenticate the users fine post the user migration. So all your users and computers are going to be affected with your AD migration, so you need to plan. So before you start with your migration, it is always recommended to perform a complete POC on your migration environment. So it's recommended to have set up your test or a UAT environment for migration. So you migrate your users in the Active Directory and run the users are migrating fine. If the users are able to authenticate in SharePoint, if SharePoint My Sites is working fine for the migrated user, etc., and ensure your success criteria is met. So I'll quickly brief about setting up your new So I always recommend setting up the SharePoint multi-server farm using automated PowerShell scripts. For experienced users, they would be aware of the scripts, whereas for the first-time users out there, you can check AutoSP installer. This can help you automate your SharePoint installations using configurable XML files, which can later be reused when replicating your environments. For other folks, I'll give you a quick overview of how you can install on premises. Most of the content I'm referring here is available in this book, Deploying SharePoint 2016 by Trevor Stewart. So a quick step-by-step would be to using the recommended hardware and software requirements of. And if you're using virtualization here, so dynamic mix, which adjust the amount of virtual RAM allocated based on the load of virtual machines, such as Hyper-V dynamic memory or VMware memory ballooning, are not supported by SharePoint Server. Networking requirements like ensuring all the TCP and UDP ports required for distributed cache or people picker, search crawler, indexing, the SQL server, the WCF services, user profile services, and the SMTP service are open and accessible from all the SharePoint servers. SharePoint automatically adds the Windows firewall rules, but if you're using an external firewall, you will have to manually configure these ports. If you're using network load balancers, avoid using the SSL offloading capabilities and instead use SSL bridging. So SSL bridging decrypts the end user's SSL session at the end of the load balancer and re-encrypts the SSL session from the load balancer to the SharePoint server. So this allows the load balancer to reuse the SSL sessions and reduce the impact of any SSL handshake. So it's very important. So this can also improve your performance if you're using load balancer. Creating service accounts, you need to create all the necessary service accounts in your new Active Directory. Using Mintool topology, so I'll probably come to that later, and making necessary antivirus configurations. So SharePoint Server requires numerous antivirus exclusions in order to prevent file locking and performance problems. Antivirus scanning the timer service configuration cache may cause the timer service to pause running jobs due to unexpected high activity within the folder. So Microsoft has listed down details of all the files, the folders, and the executables that needs to be excluded from your antivirus configuration. So you need to set that up. You need to configure the farm based on your source environment. So this is very much important because all the configuration in your source needs to be located in your destination. This includes creating the web applications, deployment of custom solutions, configuring email settings, etc. So basically all your central admin configurations needs to be replicated because those are stored in the SharePoint config database and the SharePoint central admin database when we move to the target domain. Creating the service application, so you can take a backup of service application databases and restore them in your. If your farm is small and if you do not have much content, you can straight away recreate all the service applications in the destination farm instead of migrating them. And then you have to make sure you restore all your content databases source to the right web applications in the destination. So coming back to the min role, so Microsoft introduced the new concept of min role in SharePoint Server 2016. So dedicated min role is a set of SharePoint Server roles that are defined by the services required for that role. So roles are enforced using the SharePoint port. For example, if a SharePoint server is deployed with the distributed cache min role, SharePoint will automatically provision the distributed cache. So if other services are started that do not comply with the min role selected, such as the managed metadata service, for example, The SharePoint server with the distributed cache min role will be considered out of compliance, and it will notify the administrator in central administration. So we have the following min roles available when we're installing SharePoint. Distributed cache role, so this runs the distributed cache, but it does not handle the user traffic directory. And we have the front-end role. So this role handles only the end user traffic, but also runs many servers that require low latency for end users, such as managed metadata service or user profile service. The application role runs what are considered as non-latency sensitive services, such as workflow or PowerPoint conversion service. The search runs the specific search roles, such as the admin or content processing roles. The November 2016 update for feature pack 1 for SharePoint 2016, where Microsoft introduced the concept of shared min roles. So these consist of the following new roles called the distributed cache and front-end and application and search role. So this allows you to create a SharePoint farm with a minimum of just 4 servers. You can also create a server with a custom role or as a single server farm. Single server farm is usually not recommended for production environments, but you can always use them for your dev and your test environments. The user migration. So here is the user needs to be SharePoint needs to have a two-way trust setup for both the Active Directories. So the user needs to be so before you can start migrating the user in the Active Directory, you need to make sure the user is available in the AD, the user is, and SharePoint needs to have two-way trust setup for both the ADs. So if you want the users to remain connected even after migrating SharePoint to a new domain, then the trust plays a very important factor here. So the user account needs to be, before you start the migration, you need to migrate the user account in Active Directory. You can use tools like the migration tool, ADMT from Microsoft, or there are other tools available in it like Code2, for example, which allow you to migrate users between Active Directories. So you need to migrate your user account in the Active Directory and disable the old account, or you can remove the old account. The reason here is if you do not disable the old account, the user is still able to log into your machines or on your SharePoint using the old credentials. So once you migrate the account in AD, you would want to migrate the user account in SharePoint using the STS-ADM command, even on SharePoint 2016. So the command here is pretty simple. So you just run an STS-ADM -o migrate user login. It has to be in the format domain/username and the -new login domain/username. So if you are using claims authentication, you will have to add the claims authentication identifier as well along with the username. And it's very important to include the ignore SID history in the command, because it will migrate the SharePoint users and make sure everything with the old user account is replaced with the new one. So this migrates the user's profile in entire SharePoint, including all the web applications and site collections, to the new user account. So this makes sure all permissions and metadata fields like author and editor are updated, and this point to the new user account. Even workflows and tasks which are assigned to the user in the old domain are now migrated to the user in the new domain, and the tasks reflect this change. So post user migration, you need to verify the user's access to SharePoint and also the My Site, and make sure the user is having the same level of permissions. And if the user was already part of some SharePoint group, post migration, the user is still part of that group, and technically for the user nothing has changed even after running the user migration on the AD and SharePoint. So it's not necessary this command will be used only when you're migrating users between the domains. This command can also be used when you have a corrupted SID for the user, or you've disabled an account and created a new account in Active Directory and want to migrate all the users artifacts to the new account. And sometimes it is also helpful when you want to migrate all the artifacts of a particular user to a new user. Let's say you have certain documents checked out by a user who is no more part of your organization, and you want to move all the checked out documents and all the permissions given to an old user, to the previous employee, to the new employee who has joined your organization, and you can run this command, and SharePoint will make sure everything, all artifacts belonging to the previous employee will now be migrated to the new employee. So this brings us to the end of these sessions, and we can now answer in some questions. So Nate, do you have any questions being set up?
It doesn't look like we have any questions right now, but if any attendees do, there's the chat panel in the right-hand column.
Okay.
Mohammed, could you share maybe some questions, or not some questions, but some issues that you get regularly when doing these migrations, just some common places where people might slip up?
Okay. So some of the common areas where people usually slip up are when they're migrating the users in their Active Directory. So a couple of organizations that we have worked with, one was with the demerger and one was with the merger of the organization. And during the merger, what they did actually was merging two organizations. They actually created a third organization and moved users from org 1 and org 2 to the org 3. So this was a complete different entity that was set up, and it was having a different Active Directory, different domain, and different SharePoint environment than the first one. So the challenge we faced there was the users were migrated to the domain, to the target domain, but they were not deactivated on their source domain because they had their own challenges with migrating permissions and migrating the user accounts on different other systems. The initial plan was to migrate the user from domain 1 to domain 3 and shut down the user or disable the user on the domain 1. But because this did not happen, and a two-way trust was set up between all the three domains, SharePoint was able to actually pick up users from all the three domains and show up in the people picker as well. So if you search for Nate on people picker, you will actually find two accounts with the same name, with the same account name, and it usually confuses the user because he's not sure if the user is actually migrating from the domain 1 to domain 3 or the other way around. So this is one of the challenges that we faced when we were migrating users from domain 1 to domain 3.
Thanks, Mohammed. Another question about those roles that you shared early on in the presentations. Can you go back to that slide? I think there were 4 different ones. Looks like we might have lost Mohammed. If anybody has any final questions for him, however, go ahead and send those in chat, or you can check Twitter and reply on there. I'll make sure that those get to him and that we post a response for those. Thank you, everybody, for joining us over your lunch break, and have a great rest of the day.
Do not set up their SharePoint environment in the recommended way. So they just install SharePoint using the default SharePoint installer without doing the performance improvements that can actually help them in the long run. So I would recommend buying this book from Trevor Stewart, Deploying SharePoint 2016. It's a fantastic book that can help you setting up your SharePoint 2016 farm. And another key thing here is workflows. Most of the times there are a lot of workflows in the organization which are always the source of trouble during the migration.